But when I was 19 and looking at guys on Jelly Belly, I see the big team bus, I see all their fancy stuff, I see their staff, and I think like, oh, these guys are probably like, making a living wage, and then I get there and I'm like, oh no, like that was kind of a lot, and I didn't want to feel, I kind of felt complicit if I didn't share my life in sort of an honest but humble way.
Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. Through personal and professional connections in the running world, I have the privilege of getting to know some amazing athletes. I've always been fascinated by the psychological aspects of running and what helps people to achieve success, however they define it, and this podcast is aimed at exploring this and much more. I hope you enjoy. Thank you to Tracksmith for their continued support of this podcast. Tracksmith is an independent running brand inspired by a deep love of the sport. Their new fall collection just released and is now available. It features staples ready for all of your training and racing needs. As the weather begins to change, versatile pieces are essential for handling whatever the season holds. Tracksmith's Twilight Quarter Zip and Horizon Long Sleeve are standout transitional pieces on the run. The pin dot mesh of the Twilight Quarter Zip makes for a lightweight and airy top that can be layered or worn on its own. The Horizon Long Sleeve delivers the familiar feel of cotton with the performance of a tech blend that can be put through the paces and then be worn out for coffee afterwards. By using code FTLR at checkout, you can receive free shipping and support Bigger Than the Trail, an organization that is using trail running as a platform to advocate for mental health. This episode is brought to you by Freedom Solar Power, the company I use to go solar on my house. Go solar this year and you'll get to take advantage of the 30%, yep, that's new, federal tax credit next year. It's time to break free from rising electricity costs. When I first started looking into solar, I thought it would be a clunky and expensive process. Going solar isn't as hard as you think it is, and Freedom Solar is a turnkey solution focused on educating the consumer and making sure they have all the information they need to make sure going solar is right for them, both financially and as a way to help the planet. Freedom Solar operates in Texas, Colorado, Virginia, Florida, and now North Carolina too. There are plenty of other great options nationwide. I have a super important question for you. Are you giving your body the nutrients it needs to help bolster and protect your immune system? How do you know? Friends, I'm here to help you eliminate the guesswork with two products that have had a huge impact on keeping me healthy and strong during my training and races that I strongly encourage you to try. Previnex Probiotic and Previnex Immune Health Plus are powerhouse products that can help you perform at your best and keep you healthy, especially as we move into a season where bugs that can take you down are everywhere. Use code FTLR for 15% off your purchase at Previnex.com. That's Previnex.com. Welcome back. I have Phil Gaimon joining me on the podcast today. It'll be For the Long Ride. Phil, thanks so much for taking some time to chat.
Thank you for not expecting me to run.
Well, that was never agreed on. So
hang up so fast.
well, this has been a great chat, and just like any long run, you hate when it has to end. Jokes aside, for those who might not know you and your cookie prowess, who is Phil?
Okay. I was a pro cyclist. I hate defining myself on my past, but that's the easiest way. I was a pro cyclist for 10 years, raced mostly in the US, did a couple years in the world tour, and then retired in what year was that? End of 2016, I retired. I kind of got more well known for a YouTube show, and it was a podcast initially, and then a YouTube show, and kind of just turned my own version of pro cycling into like a little social media adventure called Worst Retirement Ever. So, and the cookie thing is a whole other story, which I guess I can just try to tell the short version of that. I was known. So when I started racing, I was like just out of college. This is like 2009. This is sort of pre-social media, like it existed, but wasn't a big deal. I had an English degree, and I wrote like a weekly blog for Bicycling Magazine back then. And I think like it's hard to come up with topic on a weekly blog when you're like a low level pro domestic racer. So I was at some race somewhere in I think I was in Massachusetts. I think it was the Fitchburg Classic, but I had like a crappy weekend, like all of them were back then, and I was just like, yeah, this sucked. This town sucked. I crashed here, but I highly recommend this cookie if you're ever in town. And the next week, like I was at some other race, and someone's like, hey, I read your thing. I saw you like cookies. I brought you one, and it very like slowly snowballed. Cycling fans are weird, but it snowballed into like I'm the cookie guy, and I was defined by cookies, and everywhere I went, people brought me cookies. It took like 7 years to get to that level, but it did, and it was awesome. And so I just kind of embraced it. And I do love a good cookie, but who doesn't? So now I have a cookie themed bike ride. So the idea was when I retired, people used to bring me cookies, and now I give the cookies back to the people. I have Phil's Cookie Fondo in Malibu, where we have like all the aid stations have fancy cookies, and that's the deal. So that's the cookie situation for folks who aren't familiar.
Well, I love it for a lot of reasons. One, the perseverance to make it a thing 7 years in.
If I tried to do it, it wouldn't have worked. It was forced upon me, and I just accepted it.
I mean, I just 3 years in, it's like, we're gonna do this. It's gonna be. Little did you know you were only halfway there. Right. It was only half baked. There
you go.
So rolling it back a few years, there's another bike pun. Talk to me about your experience as a pro in those years. Why riding? Why biking? What does it for you?
Yeah, that's kind of where the perseverance comes in. The cookie thing was light compared to that. I don't know. I guess I got into bike riding in high school, and it wasn't like a competitive thing. It was a transportation thing. It was I didn't have a car until I went to college. I grew up in Atlanta, so just like riding around, hanging out with my friends, getting in trouble at shopping malls. That was sort of what you would do back then, and then it kind of got into I was overweight beginning of high school, and suddenly like bike riding just checked a lot of boxes for me all at once. Like I not intentionally like lost a bunch of weight, started feeling better, started getting better grades, and just started riding, more to just go for a ride than and we're talking like a Huffy on the sidewalk kind of ride. I didn't
now
have
you get
like
trolled
a nice
on Twitter
bike.
if you rode on the sidewalk.
Exactly. I mean, I was going at appropriate speed back then as a kid, but then, so then I went to college and joined like the cycling club, which didn't occur to me that like racing was a thing. I just figured there were it's a club, people who like to ride bikes. And I show up and they're all in like, tights and road bikes and skinny tires. And I was like, oh, so I gradually like did that. I think I put like slick tires on a mountain bike for the first semester. But then got into racing, and it was like I say it was the first thing I was ever actually good at.
What was that?
The first thing that ever came easy. Being good at something.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, what was that realization like? Not like.
It was just like I started riding with friends, and the cycling club at University of Florida was like a pretty good scene and kind of a community. It was like 50 riders on the team. It's a big school, and the coaches are still personal friends of mine. But like the first race I did was like a Cat 4-5 race, which is like, brand new riders, but people who do it, Cat 4s might have been doing it for years. And I think I won like the first 2 races I did, which means nothing at that point. But I was like, oh, this is, that was cool. I took it one step at a time, which took a very long time to get anywhere. But so by the time I finished college, I was able to go pro on like a very small team. It was Jelly Belly. It's 2009.
What did being a pro look like in 2009? I definitely want to talk about the evolution of being a pro athlete in 2009 to 2015 and beyond.
Sure.
We're in definitely an interesting period of time now. I just had a conversation with Finn Melanson, who hosts a podcast called Run Single Track, and Finn, his desire is, and we've, by the time this episode comes out, our conversation on that podcast will be out. So go check that out over on his podcast. But his desire is to basically like have the conversations that aren't happening or need to happen in regards to sponsorship and contracts and whatnot, because he's friends with so many pro athletes, and he's just been like frustrated with the lack of progress in certain areas. And this is specific to trail running. So I'm curious, your view from the cycling world, again, starting in 2009.
Right. In cycling, I'm not sure how like the licensing system works in running. Well, I have no idea. But in cycling, like the term pro is basically like owned by the governing body, the UCI. So there's like a technical definition of pro, which is you're on one of the 75 registered professional teams, and there's 3 different tiers. So that's the answer there. So I guess I would consider myself not pro because I kind of grew up in that system where like it's binary. You're on a pro team or you're not. Um, but for all intents and purposes, I'm far more professional now than I was when I got paid $2,000 a year to race full time on Jelly Belly at 23 years old and do races no one's ever heard of that created no value for anybody. And I think kind of the revelation of my retirement was I might say I was the first one to kind of be a pro cyclist without being on a team. So a lot of people like kind of retire and still have brand ambassador deals and still kind of kiss babies and go to events and compete, and like gravel's kind of grown since then. But I don't think anyone has kind of done it at like a high performance level like I sort of did, which was just that was my thing. I was having fun on Strava going for KOMs at that point, and I kind of just made a YouTube show around that. But so that was like my version of the retirement ambassador deal. But it was high performance, and it didn't occur to me at the time. But a year and a half into it, I'm selling title sponsorship. Not to mention like all the brands and endemics and non-endemics, and when I look at like the deals that I have and the deliverables and the level of competition or the level that I still perform at, which isn't competing. It definitely like throws pro in the air a little bit differently. And I've seen other folks, like I have friends who are in the world tour who I think I'm more professional than them, and I make more money than them, and
probably having more fun.
Yeah, I have more fun. I also do way more work, so I don't really want to brag about it. I do work that like I am editing videos all day, and like nobody wants to do that. So like I'm not gonna like declare victory from that respect, but yeah, it's self-driven. I don't have to crash down mountains in the rain anymore, and they kind of do. But I think we're going to see more of it in cycling, and I'm sure other sports too, as people get creative.
Yeah, it's fascinating. There's a conversation happening, or it was happening on Twitter the other day with a couple of people trying to define what a pro runner is. Mm-hmm. And I said, you guys, like, this is categorically incorrect at this point, because you have like the definition of pro anything outside of the literal definition, or the definition that the cycling world has demarcated, is like being paid to do something. And so you have non-professional, non-elites who are being paid $100,000 a year by brands. Are they pro? Or are they amateurs who are being paid by shoe and apparel brands? It's a very weird line.
Yeah, I think there's still, I mean, the way I see it is like there's a performance aspect that kind of would differentiate an athlete versus an influencer. I think the influencer thing has gotten a little bit out of hand the last few years for cycling in some ways. And then like, I don't know, this is, I'm going to kind of sound like a dick, but there's a lot of people who are independently wealthy and their lifestyle is, I'm sure this happens in running too, but there's a lifestyle of like, I like to ride my bike. And then they pick up like brand ambassador deals, and it sort of backs into a pretend job. Like they get 3 bikes for free and call themselves a professional athlete, and no one can tell them they're not, but they're not. And that just makes it like really hazy, because from the outside you can't really tell what's what. But a fun thing that I'm sure you get the same things too. Like I'll get these emails from brands. I get 20 a day via YouTube or whatever, but it's just tons of, and 99% of them are just a straight delete. But sometimes it's like a brand I've heard of or a product I'm a little interested in, and I'll reply. I'll be like, yeah, this is, I'm familiar with your thing. Here's my basic rate. And they'll say, like, I have one recently. I don't want to say the brand because then you can figure out who I'm talking about, but It was a product, and I was like, yeah, here's the rate. And they're like, oh yeah, no, we were expecting these deliverables, and it was like this many Instagram posts, this many tweets, this many whatever, in exchange for our one product, which is like a $200 product. And I'm like, well, no, if I would just buy the product before I did that. So I just like politely declined the thing. And then like 5 days later, I see 3 pros posting about this product who has smaller followings than me. I'm like, okay, like you wanted it that bad. That's fine. But it's just like I think that your things have more value than that. And yeah, so it's like, they, to the outside world, they're sponsored by this brand, except I know that they're not. They got a free thing.
Right. It's so fascinating. I get not 20 a day, but probably 2 to 5 a day, and it's just like a throwing shit against the wall and seeing what sticks for some of these brands. I got pitched by a women's cycling brand, and
I don't see anything weird about that. Oh, your beard. Wait.
And I had to inform them that I was not a woman, and they said, "It's okay. We make children's stuff too." I was like, "Well." Unfortunately for you, I'm not a child.
Yeah.
And they said, "Oh, well, thanks for the quick response." And I was only responding because they were so off base that I was like, "This must be corrected." But anyway, it's fascinating.
It's free to send an email is the problem.
Right.
That's what goes on.
Exactly. And then
and the problem is some people like we. You and I, if you make a living as some form of marketing platform, like there's a lot of steps to vetting a product before you want to advertise it. But you also what the value is, but then you see people who take it, people who aren't worth your level of endorsement, but like they'll still do it for free.
Right.
And the brands, like that's obviously very appealing to these brands when there's just a line of people who will like, oh yeah, I'll work 4 days for a free t-shirt. Because they're out there.
It's so fascinating. I was just having this exact conversation with Finn. We haven't recorded the podcast yet, so I'm excited to see where that actually goes. But what we were talking about was, so I've spent my whole career in endurance sports, or not in endurance sports, but working in and around endurance sports. Mm-hmm. Both brands I've worked at, they're not specifically for endurance athletes, but many endurance athletes use the brand. And then I also have my own platform that has grown enough to be interesting to brands. And so strategies in the past have been like exchanging product for marketing. And like this was a tactic because we didn't have budget. And when we had budget, we paid. And then that grows. And this is a very expensive product. But then you have like socks and t-shirts and, stuff where you can go out and buy it for $20. And you have people doing things that would be the equivalent of like $1,000 branded post for this stuff that's free. And what the conversation that we were having was it's damaging the platform overall and just like making it harder for people who actually know their value and are desire to be compensated for their value. When you have people, breaking their back for like a free water bottle.
I think it is and it isn't. It's the one thing is like if you're, I would compare it to my early years as a pro. So when I was on Jelly Belly, I mentioned before, like my salary was $2,000. This was a team who like didn't have a big budget, but had a budget, and had guys making a living wage. And they were kind of one of the teams, like a gateway to the World Tour was sort of their deal. They would send one guy on every year or two. Not me. It took me 5 more years, but when you're at 23, hungry right out of college, I was perfectly willing to like, this is a business with 8 million gatekeepers. This is my foot in the door. No, I can't live on this. I will live by writing a blog for Bicycling Magazine and freelance writing and sleeping on couches. And in exchange, like I'll hopefully have access and be able to make more of a living. Fast forward like 6 years later, I am making a living. I'm, it's meager, but I'm making a living. And there's this whole line of previous me's of 23-year-olds willing to try and take my job and not needing to get paid for it. And at the time I was like, I've just got to be that much better than them. Like I can't be mad at these guys willing to do the job for free. I just have to be able to drop them anytime I need to prove that I'm worth it and they're not. I see the same with social media. If there are people who are willing to break their back for a t-shirt, I have to assume that their audience will reflect that and their credibility. And I think for the most part it does. Like I know what my return is to brands, and yeah, I think it maths out. But it is, you can definitely bang your head against the wall when you see it, for sure.
To any brands that are listening to this conversation and want to work with Phil, thumbs up. It's great to work with.
Thank you. I'm not cheap, but it'll be worth it.
Very true and very true. Yeah. Switching gears. Again, we're all about the bike puns today. I'm curious about like motivation and defining success, right? Like you talked about being willing to sleep on friends' couches and just being super hungry to break through. What was fueling that for you?
I ask myself that question a lot. Like it's like, I don't know. There was a level of like, I was good, but I wasn't great. Like I never banged the door down, but like every year there was like a moment or two where I was like, oh, I could really do this thing. And so there was kind of like an addiction component to chasing something, chasing a high. But like I won some pretty big races at like a pretty young age, and saw like a level of improvement that it seemed like the top level of racing in Europe, doing the Tour de France kind of thing, was attainable. But when I look back at like what I went through to get there, like it just makes no sense. Other than like everyone, I was in an environment, a lot of people were doing the same thing. Like all of my teammates were also sleeping on couches. Just like kind of seemed normal. But it's funny, like recently, like young riders ask me for advice, like up and coming 22-year-olds. And when I look at it, I'm like, my advice is like, you want to be a pro cyclist. To me, like it might be the same as saying, the market has changed from now to then. It's gotten worse, and it was tough when I did it, and I barely made it, and I have PTSD from it. And I'm kind of like, yeah, I know what your 20s would look like, and like maybe it works out, but like you might also just be like attending typewriter repair school, and the best thing for you might be to like get out while you can. Like that's the honest answer. And like it doesn't, so generally like I avoid those young kids because I don't want to be the guy saying it, and they don't want to hear it. Well, I'm giving back by telling the truth. Is kind of how I see it. Is like, if you want me to tell you, like, here's by the way, I wrote 2 books on it, if you want to know what your 20s would be like. So here. But yeah, it's rough. So yeah, I don't know where the motivation came from. Like, sports it's hard to explain. You cross the line and put your arms up, like it feels great. And that potential.
And you're still doing it. I love following you on Strava and like seeing all these climbs you're doing. What is keeping you going today?
I mean, like riding bikes kicks ass is the main thing. Like that, that's hard to explain too. I don't know why nobody else is doing it. Yeah, no, that's the thing is like the motivation as far as like going out there and sweating, like as an athlete, as a pro athlete, like the training was always the easy part. Like I don't need someone to like, unless it's raining or 100 degrees out, like I don't need someone to kick me to get out the door. Like that's my favorite part of the day. The part that was tough was like the politics of professional cycling, the sending emails to the same team directors every 5 minutes and not getting a response, the not knowing your race schedule. Like there was a lot that was difficult about it, but like going out there and like doing a good bike ride, and even like doing intervals or a hard workout, was that part's fun. So now I can do that with less drama on the side.
And what is it about the hills for you?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I started riding in Florida. And that was one of those, like the racing is only like criteriums, like just ripping around office parks and little flat courses. And it would usually end in a sprint, which I was never capable of. But I liked it. And I thought I was like, I thought my ability was in time trials, because that was all I had available to me that I wasn't bad at. So I was like winning time trials in Florida. And then I went to, I guess I'm just like, I have power and I'm kind of skinny. So that adds up to being good uphill. It might just translate to like, it's a thing that I'm good at. So yeah, I went to like I think my second or third year racing, I went to a race with like big climbs, and I was an amateur, but like it was one of the like, there were pros in the race, and I was like in the front group on the climb, some of the best guys in the country at 19. I was like, oh, this is what I would have been good at if I didn't live in Florida. I had no idea. So I kind of just gravitated to Malibu or LA, where there's just really incredible hills and perfect weather year round and all that.
So fast forward a couple of years from 19. You're now you're in Malibu, you said, right?
I wish I could afford to live in Malibu. I live in Woodland Hills, which is the other side of the hill. I'm in the valley, as we call it. But I can basically the same hills. I can climb over into Malibu in like 20 minutes.
Got it. And is it like 120 degrees right now?
It's only 111. No, today it's actually overcast. We've had a really rough heat wave. It's crazy. Like you wonder why it's so expensive in Malibu, and like it's 110 here, and you ride over the hill, and it's 86 in Malibu. I don't know how the heck. I don't know what they get the ambient weather air conditioned over there.
Well, it's like San Francisco. Like some parts of San Francisco are like 110 right now, and there are other areas where it's like 72, and people are cold.
Yeah, that's what goes on. They're wearing puffy jackets at the coast.
Exactly, Patagonia and Birkenstocks. It's your VC starter pack. Anyways, curious about your definition of success and how it's evolved over your career and retirement.
Yeah. I mean, for the longest time, like all I wanted was like a living wage to ride my bike. Like that was, and I guess that sort of evolved, but that was kind of the answer. It's just like, I just want to like be able to enjoy this and have enough like stability and ability kind of was tied into stability in the sports. Like I was just never quite good enough to have like a 2-year contract for $50,000. Like that was like all I was looking for all those years. And I never got it. So it's just like my 20s were just this like endless cycle of you sign to a team and you do everything you're asked, and then you get the boot because it's just a bad market for really a full decade. So I was just like never quite good enough to kind of command, if you're just like one notch better than I was, and you're on the list of doing a couple grand tours, like some of those guys are making 200 a year and they're on the same team for 5-6 years in a row, like that sort of thing. I was just one notch below that, where at my level, like, you don't know what race you're doing the next month. You're like on a list for something and you train for it, and then you fly there and they're like, psych, the other guy pulled out of this race and he's coming over here. So we're sending you back to the US. It's like, okay, cool. But that was how I was kind of just like, I just want to feel okay. and never quite, or really just like see my potential was another goal that I never quite felt like I got. You don't get like a good run at a season or an event if you're not like kind of one of the guys who the team cares about.
How was that mentally?
It was hell. It was really, it was brutal.
How did you manage it?
I mean, I guess I just reset my expectations a lot. And it's a lot of times you're kind of just looking at, okay, like, you fool yourself, like the next race is going to be the one, and you control what you can control was like a big mantra. And like the rare occasions when like, okay, like, hey team, like, let me, like, this is the race I'm targeting. Leave me alone for a month. Let me train for it. And don't send me to like this thing in Belgium or this thing in North Carolina. Like, just let me prepare for this, and like, I'll win. And then I would go win. And yeah, once in a while you kind of get that. But for the most part, like it's just my job was to kind of stay at 90% and to kind of be ready for whatever else. And no, I never figured out like emotionally how to deal with it. Like the happiest I was in my racing career was my final year, like 2016. And basically, like, I kind of had the feeling from April, they sent me to Paris-Roubaix, which is this like legendary race for people who have the exact opposite body type and ability for me. So it was like the coolest thing I ever got to do, except I never should have been there at all, but just everyone was getting sick. It was one of those springs, just like guys are getting the sniffles and dropping like flies. So like they called in the D team, which was me. And I was like, okay, they're going to fire me again. Like normally it took until October for me to figure that out. But now I was like, okay, it's already April. They don't give a shit about me. So like I could see that going. And also I'm 30 at that year. I was 29. I was 30. I was like, so I can see, here's my trajectory is going to go a different direction now. And at that point I was like, okay, I'm just going to try and enjoy my 1 year as a pro because I never got to before because I was always chasing it. So here's just, I'm going to live in Girona and not pretend to like save money. And I'm just going to think about this chapter for once. So it was really like, I didn't get to enjoy it until it was kind of over. But I did make myself have it for those few months.
If you've been enjoying this podcast and can spare 90 seconds of your time today, can you do me a favor? Can you pop over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review? It helps other people find and enjoy the podcast too. Thanks so much. Thanks again to Tracksmith for supporting the podcast and for their continued support of not just this podcast, but for the running community in general. I'm proud to partner with Tracksmith, and I'm excited that with all purchases made using the code FTLR, you will get free shipping, and Tracksmith will donate 5% to Bigger Than the Trail, an organization that is using trail running as a platform to advocate for and provide resources related to mental health. Thanks again to Freedom Solar for supporting this episode of the podcast, as well as our desire for a greener energy source. The buying process was fascinating and so eye-opening, most notably how simple and cost-effective it can be. I'm excited to pay my learnings forward. If you're curious, message me on Instagram or Twitter, and I'd be happy to help you get in contact with some great resources or even just answer some questions. Freedom Solar is a full-service solar company installing solar panels and backup power systems since 2007. They operate in Texas, Colorado, Virginia, Florida, and now North Carolina too. My parents have the same panels from a different company in Massachusetts. More than a few friends and podcast listeners have already gone solar, and they're all so excited and happy with the process with Freedom Solar so far. Previnex has amazing products that have benefit my health and the health of other runners that I know, which is why I'm so excited to introduce Previnex to you as our newest sponsor. They also have a killer everyday immune supplement called Immune Health Plus that I've been taking and will tell you about in a future episode, but I highly, highly recommend you check these out and try the products for yourself. One of the best parts is that if you don't experience benefits on any product within 30 days, they have a no questions asked 100% money back guarantee for a full refund. You have no risk and everything to gain here. Use code FTLR for 15% off your first purchase of any products at Previnex.com. That's Previnex.com. And I can't wait to hear about how these products are making a difference in creating health in your life. It's interesting, like your intentionality around living in the moment. I don't know. It sounds like it worked or brought you some level of happiness. How do you ensure that like what you learned from that experience carries over into like how you live life today, or do you?
Yeah, I mean, I think just like removing all of the. I mean, I kind of just got lucky in a lot of ways that like my whole YouTube existence and Strava, like the timing of all of my ideas kind of fell into place in these weird ways at once, to where like I am in control of that stuff now, and I can make my own schedule, and if I don't feel well, I can postpone it. And I'm ironically, like I have better gear, I'm better funded, I can, I know where I'm going next week. Really just like being able to take it into my own hands is sort of a luxury that I guess I bang my head against the wall to build, but that's like I always knew that was what it would have taken, but it doesn't exist in the kind of the pro world at my level.
So backpedaling to what we were talking about before, what does success mean to you?
A list of cycling analogies.
I know I can't stop.
No, please don't. At this point, the pressure's going to be on in a few minutes. We're going to keep coming up with them.
What does success mean to you today?
I think it's the same. I just want to feel okay, and I finally have, like the last few years. I think when I stopped, because I was 30, because like I don't know, it was a pretty sour taste in my mouth from the sport in general at that point. I think like for a couple of years, whether I wanted, I probably would admit at the time, but I had something to prove as far as like, I deserve to have been there. You know, I was strong enough, all of that, which like all my teammates knew. And it was just like the politics and the size of these small teams. But I think like 3 years in, I'd done enough stuff. I was like, okay, I'm still creating this much value for sponsors. Like they're still calling me. I've been out of the sport for 3 years. Here's my power. Here's all these records I've set on climbs. Here's an Everesting record. Here's a world-class pursuit, which is a 4-minute effort, which is the exact opposite of an Everesting. Here's just a well-rounded physical specimen. 3 years after I was told I was irrelevant and worthless to pro cycling, I was like, all right, I'm sad. I'm not revenge anymore. Like I've made my point. And there's no more like kind of fire in that respect. And now it's just like the process and enjoying it, and like the creative part, which is a good box to check. I think that was kind of stifled in the pro community too. They always, at least back then, creativity wasn't really rewarded in the sport. It was a little more stuck up.
And today you're just you're totally in control of outcomes.
To the extent that anybody can control of outcomes,
Sure,
yeah.
Versus like get on a plane to Spain next week, you're racing kind of a deal.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Now it's like the goals are my own idea, and then the process is my own kind of timeline.
So 2020 must have been interesting for you, 2020 and beyond, particularly, you know, how nobody was able to race. And it was, you know, we saw in running so many FKT attempts, and Everesting in running and Everesting in cycling. Yep. And so I'm curious how you handled, I don't want to call it like the freedom, but like the creative liberty that afforded. Like how did you position your goals, or how did you think about goals over the last couple of years?
Yeah, no, 2020 was definitely like a big change for me on a lot of ends. It was, I'll be honest, like my support was very good before then, but like things were working going into 2020. And then when 2020 happened, I think the quote of that year for me was Hunter Thompson: "When the going gets weird, the weird turn pro." And suddenly there's this year where like, okay, all the races are canceled, and I'm creative and nobody else is. And I was just like, you know, that was still kind of the tail end of me kind of looking at these teams, and you know, pro teams, like all they did for really like a full year was just the same Instagram post every week of like, we're sure looking forward for racing to get started again. And I'm over here like, and I saw the opportunity of just like, you know, quickly boring. I could see like my views were growing on YouTube. Yeah. So like I set the goal of Everesting. Like, okay, I'm not traveling. Normally I would just like do, you know, 8 trips a year and go for KOMs. And that was my show. And I was like, okay, I'm going to Everest. I can do that kind of at home, and I'm going to set that as a goal and show the process. And kind of as that started to kind of gain traction, and because there is no Giro to watch, I was what was there. And I kind of saw like, okay, I'm just going to double down on content. I'm going to make, you know, 3 times the videos, and they're not going to be as high quality, but people want to watch something. They want to watch bikes right now, and I'm the only game in town. And sponsors followed, and for the most part, like I was able to retain pretty much. You know, if you're a brand in 2020 and you wanted to market to bikes, like you had to call me, because the teams were kind of sitting on their asses, and it was a little bit too late. So yeah, it worked.
It's so fascinating because, again, I sit on both sides of the equation as someone who like creates content, as like buzzwordy as that sounds, and then also on the brand side, working with people who are creating that content, and I see that like it's not all about performances anymore. It's about letting people in, opening up, showing the process, and like inviting them to follow along. For you, has that always been the case, or was it like, is that who you are? Did you realize that was important to brands and to your audience, and so that's why you're doing it? Because I think you do it really well, and you bring like a level of humor to it as well, which I think it like there's so much stale content out there, and so the ability to like infuse humor into being a real human versus an athlete who's trying to win
Right.
is incredibly impactful.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I guess if you can't win, you'd better be funny was kind of what I sort of naturally fell into maybe my entire life. But I don't know, from a sport perspective, like, yeah, from starting out, we'll go back to like, I'm on Jelly Belly, I'm on Kenda Pro Cycling, I'm making no money, I'm 23, 25. And that at that point in the cycling world, like, you're still a pro. There was kind of this bubble that, but when I was 19 and looking at guys on Jelly Belly, I see the big team bus, I see all their fancy stuff, I see their staff, and I think like, oh, these guys are probably like, making a living wage, and then I get there and I'm like, oh no, like that was kind of a lie, and I didn't want to feel, I kind of felt complicit if I didn't share my life in sort of an honest but humble way of like, okay, no, I'm, here's my apartment, here's my roommates, like that whole thing. So like telling that story kind of enabled me to feel like I wasn't full of shit as a human being, and making light of it kind of helped me survive it at the same time. So yeah, that's kind of just gone all the way through.
Cool. Shifting over to something else.
Nice. Okay. Really impressed.
What do you know now that if you could talk to 23-year-old Phil, you would say?
I guess the two things, actually 23 is a specific point where like the mistake I made in my career, and I think this is like a humble thing, but it was also a mistake of, I think I was thinking too small at a young age, where I was always looking at the next step. So when I was a Cat 5, when I first started, that's the lowest category of amateur racing, I was like, I just want to be a Cat 4. And I took steps to be a Cat 4, and then all the way to Cat 3. And at some point I was like, okay, I'm a pro. And then every time I get that next level, I would think like that was the goal, I've achieved it. And I look around and be like, oh, well, this sucks, I better find another level. Where I think if I was a little bit smarter or a little bit more experienced, or around, people who had experience where I was going, I would have said, like, at 21, I would have said, oh, I want to be World Tour. And because the middle was pointless, there was no middle. And if I'd said that, I might have made some different decisions, taken some different tracks. And I've seen like the people who succeeded at a higher level pretty much all did that. There was very few who like actually climbed the fake USA cycling category ladder and went, well, there's 3 of us who actually like made it to the World Tour. In my era, as like me, Keel, Ryan, and Ted King are like the only ones who actually, like, so to which I would say it's not even a real thing. But other guys, just like, Brandon McNulty was just like, I'm junior national champion, I'm going to go World Tour. And here's, so he was probably like training like a World Tour professional at 18, 19. And I was training to win the criteriums that were within a 2-hour drive of me. So big picture. So that's one of like actually looking long-term and assessing what those were. The other thing I wish I could tell 23-year-old me was like, this goes all the way to 29, 30. But I wish I could tell myself it was going to be okay, because I didn't think it was all those years.
It's so fascinating how many people answer with that when I ask this question.
There you go. Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, my 20s sucked because I was chasing something that didn't exist, or that wasn't attainable, or that I didn't know what it was. And I only succeeded after I gave up. It's one of the better ironies. And yeah, none of it could have been planned. But at some point, like when I retired, like that's a term they force on you. When I no longer decided to race anymore, or was able to race anymore, I had nothing. I was 30, and I essentially, like, the whole upside of the sacrifice and the sweat and whatever, like, I wasn't going to get any of it. So I essentially like wasted a decade, and my best years, and my I had an English degree to fall back on, which isn't a thing. It was pretty scary.
Those realizations are always so interesting, but I think a lot of it comes down to, like, sometimes you just have to get through it, right? Like, I love asking this question. I love getting retrospective on it. And a lot of people are like, yeah, it sucked, but I wouldn't change anything, because you sort of have to go through it in order to appreciate what you have. And so on the flip side, let's say fast forward 10 years, not to spin the tires too much on something entirely hypothetical. Fast forward 10 years, what are you really proud of accomplishing that you haven't done yet?
You think, what am I going to accomplish?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think, I don't know. I don't really, I kind of stopped making long-term plans. Really, 2020 killed that. I can't tell you how many plane tickets I canceled that year. I had the whole year planned out. I actually had a TV show on PBS that was like funded and ready to go for that year. I'm not even joking. That just completely went in the shitter. It was funded by the tourism boards of like 3 different European countries. So early 2020, I never even emailed Italy back. But I had contract.
Italy is still waiting for your email.
No, I guarantee you they're relieved that they never heard from me again. Yeah, that was. But there was just a lot of. So at that point, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna. I saved some money. Like I have sponsors that trust me enough to basically just say like, I'm going to do a bunch of cool stuff with your stuff this year. I don't know what it is, but it's going to be 1 week at a time. Whereas early on, like, no one knew, what, myself included, what I was doing. But brands would be like, yeah, what's your event calendar for this proposed sponsorship? And I'd have to like write a calendar that would like be in the trash by March every year, because I just found cooler stuff to do and I wanted to obey that. And at some point I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to give you a calendar anymore, because that's a waste of my time. And I know I'm not going to do it, because like my advantage is I'm light on my feet and I can just like jump on a plane and go do this thing because people are talking about it right now. So yeah, I don't have a plan for the next few years. I want to write another book. I like the storytelling of YouTube. I like the quality of like writing a book, and that you can like actually slow it down. And like, I think my last book was as good as I can make it. It's perfect. And I'm like really proud of that as a product, as like a work of art. It sounds obnoxious, but like I wrote every word in that book, and I went through it 1,000 times, and I spent 6 months on like 180 pages. And like, I'm really happy what it says and what it means. And I'll publish a YouTube video and it goes really well, and then I'll like see a typo I put in one of the titles. It's like, I just had to get that out, So like I'm happy with those products too, but it's just a different beast. And I think a beast is the term for it. So yeah, I think 10 years from now, like it'd be cool if there's more people doing some version of what I'm doing, if I've kind of like helped to blaze that trail or establish that as a thing, and people like kind of cutting out that middleman and winning the sport to an extent. But I don't really know how that's going to look. Like I don't have ideas for it. I hope it's a thing, and I kind of see it happening in some directions, but yeah, it's questionable. The UCI does a good job.
more process than like throwing a dart at a wall, and that's what you're going to do.
Right.
I feel obliged to ask, because you're closer to it than all 230 of my other guests. Why is gravel so hot right now?
I mean, a few things. I think gravel is hot for one, because at least a few years ago, gravel was kind of established as this is a new bike people will buy. So like the purchase cycle for running shoes is pretty short. Like think about the new running shoe, everyone's going to buy it within 60 days because you guys wear your shoes out. I think a life cycle for a bike is more like 3 or 4 years. And the bike industry, had this good problem where suddenly the bikes were of a high quality that they lasted a while. So people didn't need to replace their bike every year. So they'd come out with like, oh, now we're, 9 speed to 10 speed. Like, and they had a harder time getting folks to drop the dime on a new bike. So inventing a new category of gravel was kind of the way they got around that. It's like, oh, you don't need a new bike, you need an additional bike. And once they figured that out, I think gravel was a big push. And there's like, I enjoy riding my gravel bike. There's a lot of trails near me. The weird thing is like, I prefer those trails on a mountain bike. So there's a very specific like use of gravel bikes that I think is superior, where it's like, it's a mix of, maybe it takes half an hour to get to the trail, and riding a mountain bike, it would take 45 minutes. But like once I'm on the trail, like I'm a lot more comfy with like Factor has a mountain bike, and I'm stoked to get it. Versus like essentially a gravel bike, it's just hard to control, and I'm more likely to eat shit. And then so that turned into events. And so the other combination of what made gravel take off, I would say, is like kind of the death of competitive road cycling in the US, which is another whole podcast. But that's a downward spiral that really started when I started racing, was kind of the end of the Lance era. And every year there was one fewer major stage race. And then there's fewer teams because they have fewer stage races to go to. And it just slowly died to like now there's just not much of a competitive road scene at all. So I think gravel is kind of like more filling that vacuum of what USA cycling has lost. There's just folks who like the beginning of my career was like what's the nearest USA cycling race where I can score upgrade points and drive, Friday afternoon, you drive 3-4 hours, stay in a hotel with 6 dudes and race and hope to win $200 in prize money and go home. And that scene has been kind of replaced by gravel events, which are cheaper to put on. You don't need as many permits. They're in remote areas. And that's kind of pushed by the bike industry. And then the whole gravel pro thing is kind of a different, I think that's sort of an offshoot of kind of what I've been doing, of people like, okay, I'm not racing the road anymore. And we'll see if there's sponsor value to be had in that. We'll see if that's proved out.
It's so interesting to watch it evolve. So my dad and I built up a cyclocross bike in the summer of 2020, and then I took it out. So that was geared for like cyclocross in New England, specifically like the Cape. And I took it to Boulder and tried to ride uphill on it. That didn't work. So as one does in Boulder, I bought a gravel bike, or I bought another bike, and it was a gravel bike. And it's just like, it's such an adventure, and it's such a different experience. I love my road bike as well. And like my gravel bike is faster. It's also like, I don't know, probably 30 years newer, but it's like, oh yeah, I want to go down this trail, or what's around this corner. My grandma has a place out in Western Mass where the paved roads turn to dirt roads.
That's Power's territory.
And, like, with no warning. And so it's cool for that kind of thing. But what I think is the coolest about gravel is it's not just like a bunch of skinny white dudes riding bikes. It's like the most diverse event that I've seen. I was in Scratch's office, and there was an East African team that was there, like doing sweat testing and nutrition testing and all sorts of interesting stuff. And it's so cool to see different people doing a sport that like we traditionally have seen just from like mostly white men.
Agreed. I think the bike industry really bit itself in the ass like in the 90s with branding as high end and exclusive. They were trying so hard to sell $5,000 bikes that they really aimed for the San Francisco crowd, for the rich folks, the Patagonia vests kind of dude that we're talking about. And exclusivity was like, I mean, specifically like a marketing term, which now like the entire industry is rebelling from. Like with inclusivity is on every, and it's just weird to watch that entire cycle, and like they're trying to undo what they did. And now it's like, no, we do like black people. It's like, well, there wasn't one in your catalog for 25 years. So like forgive them for being skeptical. But yeah, and it's funny, and that yeah, you're absolutely right. And gravel kind of did a good job as like being the counter to that road racing stuck up, your seat height is wrong, your sunglasses need to be over your helmet straps, like that. The amount of that bullshit.
Your socks have to match your blah blah blah.
It's so insane, and it's so ingrained. And it's like, I think it's finally like now those guys are getting eye rolled on the road bikes, but it's still there. And I think honestly, I think a lot of my success on Strava, like when I started a Strava account, it was that period in 2016. And originally, like that was kind of where my next chapter started, and where I sort of blew up. But was I was on there, like I was sort of the first, like pros had Strava accounts, at least a few of them did, but like no one was targeting segments and going really hard except like local amateurs who all like like everyone knows their time up Lookout Mountain in Golden or Old La Honda or Mandeville Canyon, LA. Like they all have these like super dork conversations. No pro had ever actually like tried as hard as a local amateur at one of those. So I was the first one doing that, and I was shattering all those times. And I think what I accidentally did in that process was just like burst all those bubbles of those guys just taking themselves too seriously for dumb shit. Um, and like, no, here's like, yeah, I'm a minute faster on this thing, like, so so why are you being such a pain in the ass? It was kind of like, everyone else on Strava was so sick of that one guy. And I think like I went and kind of strategically like poked all those guys nationwide. And in a way that was like, yeah, I'm just having fun on this thing. But here's what it looks like.
I think the takeaway is like, have more fun, right?
I mean, I certainly endorse it. Not fun doesn't seem great.
Put on a t-shirt and pedal it with influencers.
Yeah, and I mean, I still do a high performance thing. Like that's still kind of my angle. And I guess like if I have a next chapter, after I'm 36 now, like if I'm still doing some version of this, like the thing I did in the last few years is I showed like you can kind of be a pro cyclist without being on a team. The next thing is, can you be a pro cyclist without being fast? Can you do that just honestly and storytell? And Keel Reinen, was World Tour, and he just did a ride. I think he just rode with his daughter in a trailer. So he went. Rebecca's Private Idaho is like one of the bigger gravel events, and there's people racing it. And like Keel could have gone and raced it and like potentially won, or for sure like been on the podium. He's like a very high caliber athlete. He rode with his daughter on a trailer instead. And like, which one is cooler? Which one is better storytelling? Which one gets more photos shared? Like, which one is more valuable to his sponsors? Like, I'm not sure. But that's like the cool direction that things could go. And which one is more relatable? I don't know. I'm not sure if you sell high-end bikes when you're dragging a 60-pound trailer. But I don't know, you should.
but it's an evolution, right? Like maybe it's not the same partners for, the next 20 years.
Yeah, I like Keel's version better, but that might just be because like I'm sick of the pro thing. Like I was too deep in it for too long, and I'm like, yeah, that guy did something different. I see that as a win.
Totally. What is something you're afraid of when it comes to endurance sports?
I mean, that's not super specific, but like I'm afraid of getting hit by a car. That's the easy one. Like it's funny, like when I ride, the way I ride now versus probably how I rode as a 23-year-old, but when I ride with like younger athletes here, like I get to the top of the hill and like they're having fun ripping down it, and I'm like, I'll see you guys at the bottom. Like I did enough of the other thing in the pro thing. Like I'm officially maxed out on the adrenaline rush and enjoying that whole thing. And like, there's driveways on this road. So, so like, I'm not doing that. And by the way, like, I could drop you if I want to going downhill, but I'm not going to. But yeah, that's the main answer, like on the road. And that's definitely a big appeal of gravel too, is like, if you let that, it took me a long time to like be able to shrug off the people honking and be able to feel comfortable, like taking control of traffic. That kind of thing. Like I ride Sunset Boulevard every week. Doesn't bother me anymore. Like I know how to do it. I'm fast enough that like I can bust in front of a car if I need to. And like, I'm present enough that like I'm directing traffic behind me. Like I just, and I'm not even in people's way really, but I'm still going to get honked at and still, something, there's an asshole every day that like,
yeah,
if that gets to you, that gets to you. And the trails are, free of that.
Yeah, my dad's 62 and he's been riding his bike for about 63 years. And
just the math, hang on.
Yeah, and he stopped. So he did the PEMS challenge for 22 years as a rider, and now he's been volunteering just because he like nobody pays attention when they're driving anymore. And he's like, I have too many friends who have been killed on bikes to like feel good about saying bye to your mother and going out for a ride. And March, April, May of 2020 were some of the best months I ever had on a bike because I was living at my parents' on the Cape and nobody was driving. And it was like, you owned the road. But it's such an unfortunate truth with that sport that like there's so much death.
Yeah, that time, just as an aside, that time in LA was also like you've never seen the roads. The roads were clear.
The smog.
The air was clean, and and there's days like this now, like after a little rain or like a nice wind, you're like, holy shit, that's Catalina Island, but there was like a couple months there where I was like, this is why people came here in the 50s. Like, this is why LA is LA, and it's now been ruined. Like there's moments, but I mean, I love it here. No, but you're right. I think one of the things that like people don't realize when they talk about like, having safe bike lanes, like that's something I've gotten into more of trying to, make it where it's safe to ride bikes for everyone. And the thing is, like, I feel safe on the road because I can take a lane because I can go 35 miles an hour whenever I want to. But like, that's not true for a 9-year-old trying to go to school. But it's easy to like forget that when you think about like, oh, this is how things should be. And so, yeah, it comes to like, you have to have a certain level of fitness to keep yourself safe, which takes a while to get there. And when someone just tries cycling, like they're going to get freaked out in 5 minutes, rightfully so. So yeah, I think that's like a big hurdle for road bikes and for everything, for society at large and fossil fuels.
Go electric, but plug it into solar, right?
There we go. Yep, we were tweeting about that earlier.
We had to get back to that. I don't want to end on a sad note. So I'll frame you for a tough one here. Just kidding. It's easy. What's one thing you're
He framed me. You didn't even mean that pun. Like frame.
No, I did.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Well, what's one thing that you're excited about this week?
This week. This week's tough. I'm you wanted to not end up on a bummer. I just got a house in Big Bear and I was going to go up there, but it's on fire. So that's how it's going. But no, I guess I'm looking forward. My house isn't on fire. It's just the valley over is on fire. So like the highway is closed and there were some evacuations, but the things are lifted and it looks like I don't think any structures were damaged, but some of the trails I like to ride on. Anyway, it looks like I'll be able to go up there and check it out. The whole goal was to escape this heat wave and hide out in Big Bear, and I'll have missed that. But yeah, so that's some fresh air with a slight scent of barbecue. Barbecued trees is what I have to look forward to. It's still nice up there. It's still quite peaceful.
Cool. Well, it's not where I thought you were going to go with that, but
that's my week,
Yeah. Well, spoiler alert, life is hard.
Mm-hmm. That's
hopefully, there are a couple of fires going on in California right now. So hopefully those get resolved. We've been lucky here in Boulder so far this year. Again, I hope when this episode comes out that continues to be true. But Phil, thanks so much for taking some time to chat today. And we'll see you out there.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next time on For the Long Run. And in the meantime, happy trails. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too. This podcast and the accompanying music has been produced by Brian Walters of Single Track Sound. For the Long Run's logo was created by Vanessa Wolf of Sterling Wolf. Show notes have been written by Ruby Wiles and is managed by Emily Holland. It takes a village.